up to whatever, 200,000 or whatever is appropriate. I'm not going to fill in that gap. And that this be actioned after a report in 8 weeks, did you say, Anne? You okay with that, really?
I'd rather that, I mean, we can make an amendment after the fact in terms of the LTP at any time. So I just think that, I think it would be wrong to try and settle an amount, because especially when you're going out to ask how much it would cost. Yeah. It was, I don't know, but the particular school that I went to said that putting an amount on a budget actually just sets the minimum that you're going to get charged. And so I would rather that we ask for that report back, but within 8 weeks, so that the council's in a position to make a decision, and that way we can get all of the detail that we need. Paul?
Just want some clarification. Are we going to be cleaning the stone as well?
No, that they are taking care of that as far as I'm aware. Is that right? Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, so if Councillor Scandrett and Goff are okay, that the council urgently provide advice on the costs of removal, clearance and storage of the Sydenham Church remains, and the, is it the future use, the proposed future use of the site?
Well, it's the council urgently will work with the trust to provide an urgent cost, because I think you've got to work with the trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Anne knows that.
Yeah, that the council work with the Sydenham Trust. What is it? Sydenham Church Trust?
The Church Heritage Trust.
The Sydenham Church Heritage Trust to urgently provide advice on the cost of the removal, clearance and storage of the Sydenham Church remains, and also provide advice on the proposed future use of the site, because that was something that they were supposed to be looking at before, but I think they've got stuck because they've got stuck with that word asbestos and nothing's moved ever since.
So they feel they can't do one without the other.
And report back to us.
And report back to the council in 8 weeks. So what's that? By the end of July. Is that right? No, by the end of August. By the end of August. Sorry, I missed a month. Yeah. By the end of August. No, just don't put 8 weeks. By the end of August. So, and can you change the first council to the word staff? That staff. I'll take out the, yeah, put staff. That staff work with the Sydenham Church Heritage Trust to urgently provide advice on the cost of the removal, clearance and storage of the Sydenham Church remains, and also provide advice on the proposed future use of the site and report back to the council by the end of August 2015. All right, so we're all good with that. I'll put the motion.
May I contribute?
No, we've already had the one contributor, unless someone's going to speak against that motion.
Oh, no, it falls in between, really. Oh, is it?
Yeah. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anne, for coming down at such short notice and for providing such good support. Thank you. That was a great entrance. Yeah, we'll invite you back. Okay, so for this one, that the council seek a report on current maintenance levels of service for earthquake damaged areas.
Well, this is if you were going to run out of...
That seems pretty general and not very specific. So perhaps if you could just indicate to us what you're trying to get to, and we'll see if we can develop a resolution that would be a useful contribution to the LTP.
Okay, sure. I actually think we can measure earthquake damaged areas in terms of the damage as measured by SCIRT. They always used to provide reports by ward in the previous council term. This is for some reason no longer provided, so monthly we would receive a ward breakdown of projects, specific projects and associated budgets, I think it's pretty obvious where most of the damage is in the city. The wards in that sequence are Burwood Pegasus, followed by Hagley Ferrymead, followed by Shuri Papanui. That has always been the measured areas of damage by skirt. If we look at, and in many of those cases, the levels of service are attached to them. I'm going to actually talk about New Brighton because there is a perception that we're not doing the basics right, and my view is that we need to be seen to. There is earthquake damage there. There are 3 contracts that surround that mall precinct, the mall itself, Marine Parade, and then the beach, which is actually administered by us, although it's actually Crown domain. There is dissatisfaction. We need to have it spick and span. I noticed a staff comment that it might have budget implications. It doesn't have to. It's actually about performance of these contracts. And as Councillor Paul Lonsdale said before, sometimes squeezing these to actually get better performance. So it doesn't necessarily have to cost more. We just want a good quality job done. So I would like this attended to. Doesn't necessarily have to have budget implications, but I think it's about performance of the contracts. There's a lot of dissatisfaction over the state of the mall. It's not all the council's doing, but we have to do well what is our domain, and that's why I'm pushing this forward.
Yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from, but I don't know that this wording is really anything more that we could just deal with at an ordinary council meeting. You know, I mean, it doesn't need to go through the long-term plan to happen. What you're actually asking for is regular reporting on maintenance levels, levels of service that have, you know, in areas where there has been a particular impact in relation to the earthquake. Because actually, I mean, all of Christchurch has been damaged by the earthquake, but there are parts that are more damaged than others. And actually, if you lived in Littleton, to be left off that list would have been a bit, you know, sort of, you know, concerning. Because, I mean, there are different parts of each ward that are particularly impacted, some more than others, depending on whether, for example, there have been other impacts. But anyway, the thing that you're trying to achieve here is a regular reporting so that you can monitor. But the monitoring really has to be done by the appropriate committee rather than by the council as a whole. And that's something that, in this particular instance, maintenance levels would be infrastructure, transport and environment. So I'm wondering, I'm just trying to catch the eye of Councillor Clearwater as to whether this is an appropriate reporting headline for your committee. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, because I mean, you mentioned the New Brighton one, but I just, you know, back in the day, and it wasn't that long ago, the business association used to pay somebody to clean up the mall every Monday morning, and you know, that was just standard practice. And when he retired, he wasn't replaced. So there are, you know, and something that I want to have happen, but it's not something to move through this plan, but it is something that I want to propose, is in New York City, they're called business improvement districts. And basically they self-rate for everything that they want to do that's on top of what the council provides as the minimum, they provide on top of. And whether it's to beautify or whether it's to provide security or whether it's to put in a cycle lane, whether it's to whatever they want to do as a business community and their local neighbourhood, they decide for themselves and they rate themselves. The council distributes the money back to them, they collect it for them and distribute it back to them. BIDs, they're called, business improvement districts. And that's the sort of approach that, coming back to that whole concept of working in partnership with our communities, that's something I want to explore. And maintenance levels of service, you know, are part of how you get the whole community involved in monitoring performance and feeding back in a meaningful way. Because honestly, if the council does it for the community, they will never see this as something that they can actually add so much more value to. I just remember one photograph of a bin that was overflowing, which was our fault that it was overflowing because it hadn't been emptied. No one blamed the person that kept putting rubbish in after it was already full.
Yes, I agree. The buck stops with the council. So
Yeah.
smelly toilets, overflowing rubbish bins, we've got to do,
Yes,
we've got to do what is our stuff and actually get it right.
Is it a joint responsibility? I mean, that's what I want us to promote. But if part of that is better reporting on maintenance and a better alerting system within the public, so that they're able to report, which is certainly something that Carlene's working on, then we'll get a lot further. So, but I just don't think that this amendment kind of captures the sense of what you're trying to achieve. That the council seek a report on current maintenance levels of service for earthquake damaged areas. Right.
So, would it be
Yep.
Can I just suggest on this one that we look at reporting through your committee, Phil, in terms of how these contracts are being met and if there is any areas that need improvement. On a more practical note, because we heard so often from people, particularly in the east, right through the east, that they were concerned about maintenance levels. Arlene and Jane and Andrew have been working on a clean-up for this weekend, for Saturday, to actually help bring those up a bit, so that in conjunction with a range of organisations in the community. So that will be, it's planned for this Saturday. But just in terms of the general stuff, I think a regular report through Phil's committee that not just deals with Brighton, but deals with any maintenance issues.
Can I put this one on hold? There's a number of amendments that are basically reporting amendments that are not the kind of issues of substance that we need to be debating as such, because they're kind of like, like everyone agrees that they should be there. But let's try and structure all of those, and I'll do some work on that overnight, and we'll see if we can block all of those together and pass a single resolution about the nature of the reporting that we want going forward. So, I don't think it will be problematic.
I think we also need to be mindful that the service contracts changes on the 1st of July.
They do actually.
Substantial amount of monitoring of the new service contract and the initial stages of it.
But they've in terms of parks and stuff like that, that's going to be a lot more focus on the community board. So the community board is going to be meeting with the contractor on a regular basis, as I understand it from the report that we received. So, but anyway, I just don't think that we're going to move on this one at this stage.
If we're going to come back to this, can we please not only make it earthquake damaged areas?
No, I agree.
Think that's really key.
I agree. Yanni?
This is one that I actually put forward because I've heard this for at least 3 years now. And the problem is that people are told that we haven't changed the levels of service, but people know on the ground the levels of service have been changed dramatically. So what they're paying and being rated for is not the level of service they're getting in these communities, and that's why it's important to have the distinction between the earthquake one. My understanding is that there were decisions made that we would not do maintenance in areas like Sumner, like New Brighton, where there was earthquake damage until that earthquake damage was fixed. Given that those areas are going to take a lot longer to fix now because of the other stuff that's going on, it seems prudent to me to actually understand what is the current maintenance level, because this is a budget issue. There's no money on budget to do our maintenance at the best of times. Post-earthquake and in areas where we've got damage, the increased costs, we haven't been meeting. We haven't had the money on budget to do this stuff. And, I just keep thinking of the Sumner people that come in 2 years in a row now showing us photos of people falling over, injuring themselves on broken footpaths that are still broken. And I can't tolerate it anymore. We need to get action. What I was going to suggest, though, is looking at a way of going forward. We've got the performance, the strategy and Finance Committee's performance report that's coming back to council probably in 2 weeks, and that has all these sorts of levels of service. Because I actually understand why you would actually change your levels of service in some of these areas, because obviously there's some areas where you don't need to do the same levels that you were doing before the earthquake for whatever reason. There's also other areas there that are damaged that do need some maintenance, and we heard a number of submitters come to us, like the guy from Richmond, Clary, who talked about, you know, just what it meant in terms of psychologically on those people. So I think we do need to move on this, and we need to find a process to actually either make budget decisions or make levels of service decisions within the next month.
Well, I think that there are a number of issues that you've raised there. You know, the footpaths issue is one that's just, you know, really struck home, I think, for a lot of people when you look not just at Sumner, but you look at most of the streets in the east. And, you know, there are, you know, there was a view expressed at the time, and I've no idea, I haven't been here for 3 years, so there was a view expressed at the time, though, that one side of each street would be footpath available. So, you know, people could push a pram down it, people could ride on it on motor scooters, that, you know, that they could actually get themselves about. But that hasn't happened. There are streets and parklands that are completely impenetrable. There are streets in the New Brighton area where banks right onto the red zone. I don't know when we're going to be able to fix all of those footpaths when we don't know what's happening to the red zone. You know, so there are many decisions that have got layer upon layer upon layer, and it's not as good as it could be, but it is something that we actually have to work with and resolve. So can we put this one to one side, and we'll come up with some appropriate wording that picks up an ongoing reporting role through the committee structure, but also has a focus on levels of service in these earthquake damaged areas as well, because I think we've got to do both. So if you leave that with us overnight, we can...
Sure, as long as it doesn't get lost. I brought up, you know, the fact of Skirt and Enable working together before over one dig, and it's not a go at you, Phil, but that's never come back over a joined up process. So as long as this doesn't get lost,
Yeah, no, it'll come back tomorrow. It's just I'm going to have a wordsmithing overnight. So what's the next amendment that we've got? Now, people have ignored my amendment in putting up this promenade beach walk. So the amendment that I've got on the table is my recommendation 5.2. And I wrote that the council request a staff report into the feasibility of a promenade/beach walk at North Beach as proposed by Community Connection Ngānaru Trust, submission whatever, and any subsequent studies arising out of the report to be undertaken in consultation with the Trust, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu. And that's for a very good reason, and that's because of the dune system that the Promenade Beach Walk is proposed to be on. So I have an amendment that proposes that the phrase request a staff report be replaced with the words request an independent report into a design-based feasibility. So that's so the only words that change are those, but the recommendation is that the bottom part of it fall off, or that Environment Canterbury be removed. Is that yours?
Look, can I just make a comment that may sort of alleviate the problem altogether, really? Under 5.1 in your recommendations, you talk of the New Brighton regeneration project, and it was always my understanding that...
That's 5.1. I'm talking about 5.2.
Yes, I know, but I'm just saying under 5.1, you talk about the development Christchurch taking on the hot salt water pool project and the stage development of the new Brighton Suburban Master Plan. It was always my notion that the development, Christchurch, would also be looking at the promenade proposal as well. So if you were to include 2.1.3 and just put the promenade in with the regeneration, surely it would then be up to Development Christchurch to lead feasibility studies, investigative work on all of those three projects, and probably negates the need to have your 5.2 altogether.
Well, I've got no particular objection to that, other than it would still be required to be undertaken in consultation with the Trust, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu.
No, I don't have any objection with that either, but that's a given. And in fact, look, I've been talking with both Kim and Merikaraka in the last few hours. They advised me that they want to, at their funding expense, produce a design for the promenade, and I just had a text a few moments ago to say that they are currently working with ECAN staff on the proposal anyway. So I think we're just being a little alarmist here, and it's a given that this project will require consultation with a wide range of agencies before it becomes a goer. So I would simply suggest that perhaps we include the project as part of the regeneration in 5.1, and if you wanted to add in there that consultation with the Trust, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu would be part of that consultation, I'm more than happy with that.
Phil?
Look, I'd be happy with that, and I think it's really important, though, that, and especially since the group are already working with ECAN, that in fact we be really clear about the coastal science as part of the way that in fact we work with ECAN all together. So that right at the top, in the first line that David has moved, that the independent report feasibility, after North Beach, that the words including advice from ECAN. So in fact we are really clear, and it's good that the Trust are already working with ECAN, and I just want to be clear in making a decision around something really important like this, and I do understand where Dave's coming from, very important for the people of New Brighton, and in fact we make sure that that is included at the beginning rather than any subsequent study area.
Well, you'd have to include Ngāi Tahu and the Trust in that as well. I mean, the thing is that what I've tried to capture in my recommendation is the idea that any studies arising out of the report are to be undertaken in consultation with the Trust, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu. So you can't leave either of the statutory partners out of the picture in that process. That was my thinking of why it was written that way, and David's suggestion now is that we put it under the New Brighton Regeneration Project through Development Christchurch, which I've got no objection to, but I'm just wondering, that doesn't change anything? It probably makes...
Sure, because we don't know if it's going to fly. And that's where ECAN differs from the Trust and Ngāi Tahu, because ECAN is the body that has the knowledge and the scientific base of knowledge to input into the very first stage. So let's say, for argument's sake, that they had compelling evidence to say, look, this is a no-go.
Yeah, it's not ruling out the fact that it could go to Development Christchurch once it passes the feasibility stage.
I thought it was always going to be part of there anyway.
Well, it may well be, but the feasibility study has to be done first, and the science does have to be taken into account, and our dune systems are precious, and they do need to be worked through in terms of the proposal. So, and there may be adjustments to the proposal in line with the nature of the impact on the dune system. So, I mean, I don't think that it's unreasonable to keep them separate. As I say, I've got no objection in the future, you know, if the feasibility study shows that this is something that can can proceed, so that's not the decision to proceed, but can proceed, then there's been no reason why we couldn't put it into Development Christchurch, which will be established by then. Yep. Well, I'm just checking on the wording now. So
I thought your recommendation captured it. Actually, I don't see a need to.
well, except that the difference is that a staff report into the feasibility, as opposed to an independent report into a design-based feasibility, and I think you got an amendment to change it to a pre-feasibility somewhere along the line. So.
ECAN needs to be in their very first line. It is to be involved.
Well, so does
in
Ngāi
it.
Tahu.
No, well, the scientific.
The cultural values and scientific values are both important.
Well, if that's the case, why don't we then include them all in the first line as well, in
Right,
the
that's fine.
first tranche? So, in fact, that the B...
Into a design-based feasibility of a promenade beachwork at North Beach, and then why don't we just put in brackets sort of something like inclusive of scientific and cultural values, which is why you engage ECAN and Ngāi Tahu in the process.
Yep. Do with that, Dave? Yep.
And then any subsequent studies arising are to be undertaken in consultation with all right?
Yep.
So that's the feasibility study and the subsequent things. So
Keep it as a second.
Yep.
Funding, would that?
Is that intended to come from the 3 million?
The level of funding?
Well, that was why I said I thought it was part of the, originally intended to be part of the regeneration project that Development Christchurch were leading. So I would like to also see under 5.1 that we add a 2.1.3, the Promenade Beach.
Right, the funding for it, yeah.
Where's the funding coming for the feasibility?
No, I did actually imagine that the
study.
funding for it would come from that 3 million. So,
Put a bracket against 2.1.3. Should this be feasible, the funding will come from the regeneration.
now this is the feasibility study. Request an independent report. All right, I'll have to. Why don't we add to 2.5.1 a 2.1.3 the feasibility study. As referenced in 5.2. Is that all right? Cool. Well, if everyone's generally happy with that, I'm happy to include that in my recommendation.
Should, just for clarification, what we're voting on, should we include that in the amendment then?
Sorry?
Up to?
No, but I'm saying if everyone's happy with this, I'm happy to include it in my recommendation, so it doesn't need to be moved as an amendment. 5.1. No? 5.1 gets a 2.1.3. So are people generally happy with that approach?
Can I just suggest that we put a date on it, because one of the things, when you guys have been here as long as I have, you'll know that sometimes we pass these resolutions and we wait another year and a year. So
We
I
won't
think,
be.
is it possible? Because I do think this is a really stunning proposal in terms of there's a lot of benefits to it, but there's also a lot of things that do need to be considered. And I wouldn't like to lose the momentum, so I just wonder whether, even if it's a date for a report back on where things are at, that we table that in.
Okay, so I don't know. Does anyone have I mean, I know how long is a piece of string, but how long would be reasonable for an initial report back on a feasibility study for the promenade?
That's a very long piece of string.
It's a very long promenade.
That's what I'm worried about. And it's a very sensitive area, so
Yeah.
I would have thought, and so what is pre-feasibility in that sense? But I would have thought you'd be looking at something in the order of $60,000 to $70,000 to do that, and probably, I would have thought 6 months work, yeah.
So can I just check? Like, is this for the entire thing, or is it just for that section that they'd asked to kind of look at doing as a kind of pilot?
Well, it's both. It's just like, because, I mean, they wanted to start it because that's where their community base is in North Beach. But there are those who said, well, actually, if you started it at the pier and went back, does that actually provide a greater amenity to the whole area?
Care where it starts. I just
Yeah.
want to get it happening if it's feasible,
Yeah.
and rather than have money being spent on lots of reports and
Yeah.
consultants and waiting another year, if there's a section that we could look at, and go, right, this is where we'll focus in terms of feasibility, pre-feasibility, whatever you want to call it, and here's the stuff that we need to do to make it happen, and here's why, if there's any risks or any reasons why it's not a good idea, here's what the trade-offs will be. I just don't want to have this huge, extensive study that takes on a life of its own that ends up going around in circles.
I mean, I think the principles of whether it will work or not, like you can build anything ultimately, we hear engineers say that all the time, but I mean, it'll be around the science on the dunes and the longevity of it. The principles will be sorted, and they'll probably apply for one section, 2 sections or 3 sections. It's not going to vary considerably along that stretch of coastline.
No.
So that's why I'm saying it is a piece of string. We need to know what the nature of the science is available around the stability of the dunes. We need to think about some basic design criteria for is this a permanent boardwalk, is this a sand track? Just looking at some of those options and coming back to you on that would, in my view, be what the first level of analysis would be about.
Yeah. Phil?
So I'm just making an assumption from the recommendation, from the decision we're going to make, around the costs, because Mike has referred to, say, an approximate cost estimate or guesstimate probably of 60 to 70,000. So that kind of thing, if the report showed that was warranted, would in effect be like a pre-feasibility study too, not a whole feasibility study.
But the thing is that it's putting it under the New Brighton Regeneration Project does give us a source for the funding for that report.
Yep.
And it does then give us some options about how we might want to follow up on that, because I can see that linking in very nicely with other projects that are being proposed for that area. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to put a time limit on it?
Well, I quite like the idea of getting a report back.
Hearing sort of 6 months, so should we sort of talk somewhere vaguely towards the end of 2015?
Yeah, before Christmas.